You know that feeling?
Hmm.
You're sitting in a dark theater, or maybe you're curled up on your couch, blanket pulled right up to your chin,
Uh,
and you're watching something just absolutely terrifying. Could
l-
be a slasher flick, guy in a mask, or a ghost story with doors slamming on their own.
then your brain is doing this little trick to keep you sane.
Exactly. It's whispering to you, it's okay. It's okay. It's just a movie. That's a set. He's just an actor. That blood is like corn syrup.
You're safe.
You are safe. It's a defense mechanism, just compartmentalized.
Yeah, you push all that horror into the fantasy column so you can enjoy the adrenaline rush without the existential dread.
But then the movie ends. Screen fades to black.
Yeah.
And these four little words fade in white text.
Oh.
And they just change the entire chemical composition of your brain based on a true story.
And just like that, the safety net is gone. It's just ripped away.
The corn syrup becomes blood again.
The actor becomes a neighbor. The monster isn't something that lives in a script anymore. It's something that lives in our world.
That visceral shift,
No.
right? That moment where the popcorn just turns to ash in your mouth, that is what we're obsessed with today.
Well, here's the thing. That phrase, based on a true story, it does a lot of heavy lifting in Hollywood. A lot.
It's a spectrum, isn't it?
Totally. Sometimes it means we kept the names and the dates, and that's about it. Other times it means a producer heard a rumor at a party once.
Right. And sometimes, and this is what we're getting into, the reality is actually stranger or sadder or just infinitely more horrific than the Hollywood gloss version.
And that is our mission today.
This is our mission. We are doing a deep dive into the true horror source stack. We aren't just, telling ghost stories around a campfire. We're taking a stack of police reports, psychiatric evaluations, historical theses.
And even a priest's actual diary from 1949.
Yes, to separate the myth from the man, or, well, the monster.
And we have quite the lineup of monsters for this deep dive. We are not holding back.
No.
We're going to look at the Butcher of Plainfield, the man who inspired Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
We're digging into the really tragic medical mystery among refugees that birthed Freddy Krueger.
We've got the real diary behind The Exorcist, the urban legends of the black-eyed kids.
Oh, that one gives me the creeps. We're also getting into the truth behind New Orleans' most famous ghost stories, the family murders that started the Amityville Horror.
And finally, the lethal duo known as the Hillside Stranglers.
It's a heavy stack. It really is.
It is. And I think the approach here is important. We need to sort of set some ground rules.
Okay.
We are looking at documented facts. We are looking at what can be proven, or at least what was recorded by witnesses at the time. We really want to avoid sensationalism where we can.
Although, let's be honest, some of these sources are pretty sensational on their own.
They really don't need our help.
Not at all. I'm ready to get a little spooked, but I want to be spooked by the truth. So, where do we start?
Let's start with something that feels very modern. It's a legend that feels like it's been around forever, but our sources tell a very different story.
Let's talk about the Black-Eyed Children.
This is a fascinating entry point. It's just a prime example of modern folklore, or, what the internet calls creepypasta.
Right.
If you ask people today, they might swear that these stories, the stories of black-eyed kids, go back to the 80s or even earlier.
I would have thought that.
Most people would. But when you look at the actual documentation, the trail goes cold really, really fast.
Our source material points to a very specific origin, like a single point. We're talking 1996, Abilene, Texas.
Precisely. The legend largely traces back to one guy, a reporter named Brian Bethel, and he posted a story on a ghost-related mailing list.
Yeah, that is such a 90 sentence. A ghost-related mailing list.
It really is. He posted this story describing an encounter he said he had.
Okay, so paint the picture for us.
Yeah.
What was Bethel's account? What did he say happened?
He claimed he was sitting in his car. I think he was parked outside a movie theater, using the light from the marquee to write a check.
Another very 90s detail, writing a check.
So it's late, it's dark, and suddenly there are two children standing by his driver's side window.
Okay.
At first they looked normal, maybe a little pale, but just kids. And they asked for a ride. They said they wanted to see a movie, Mortal Kombat of all things.
Of course.
But they'd left their money at home and needed a ride to go get it.
It's a classic setup. Just two kids who need a little help, but then the vibe shifts, right?
The dread just sinks in. Bethel described this overwhelming, irrational fear, a real fight-or-flight response kicking in, and then he saw the detail that launched 1,000 nightmares.
The eyes.
He looked at their eyes, and they were pitch black. No sclera, no iris, just solid black orbs. And the way they spoke, He said it was hypnotic. They kept insisting, let us in. We can't come in unless you invite us.
Which is straight out of classic vampire lore, isn't it? The idea that evil needs permission to cross your threshold, your car door, your front door.
Exactly. It plugs right into that ancient trope. Bethel, he freaked out. He rolled up his window and just drove away in a panic. But that story, that one post on that one mailing list, it ignited something.
And from there, it just exploded.
It went from a niche mailing list to the Daily Star tabloids claiming a shock rise in sightings all over the world.
It's just amazing how fast that can happen. One guy in Texas writes a post, and suddenly it's a global phenomenon.
Oh, that's the nature of digital folklore, isn't it? But then you look at the analysis from science writer Sharon A. Hill. She provides a really necessary reality check.
Yeah, what does she say?
She concludes there is absolutely no documentation of these encounters before Bethel's story. Zero. No police reports, no news articles, nothing. It's purely friend of a friend folklore.
So it's not a real phenomenon, it's just a really, really good story that went viral before going viral was even a thing.
That's it. Hill compares it to older legends, like the phantom black dogs in England. It's a classic urban legend structure. You take something we perceive as innocent, a child, and you corrupt it. You give them black eyes, you make them sound strange, you suggest they're demonic or alien.
And you have instant horror.
You have instant horror, but in reality, it's almost certainly just a story that hit the right nerve at the right time on the internet.
It's interesting because the image itself is so sticky. It's so potent. You see a kid, you expect innocence, and those black eyes just void that contract immediately.
Well, that's the psychological hook. It connects directly to the concept of the uncanny valley.
Okay, break that down for us. What is the uncanny valley?
It's a term that comes from robotics and aesthetics, actually. The basic idea is that we humans, we like things that look human. A cartoon character, a teddy bear, fine. But if something looks almost human, but is just slightly off, like a robot with dead eyes or, a corpse.
Your brain rejects it.
Viciously. Our response isn't just confusion, it's deep revulsion. It's a survival instinct kicking in, telling you something is wrong. The black-eyed kids hit that nerve perfectly. They look like children, but the solid black eyes remove any ability to read emotion or intent.
It signals predator to our lizard brain.
Exactly. So the truth here isn't that demon kids are roaming the parking lots of Texas. The truth is that Brian Bethel wrote a really compelling ghost story that hit the internet at the exact moment the internet was learning how to build and share urban legends.
So it's really a testament to the power of digital storytelling, not the supernatural.
Correct. It also illustrates a really interesting concept from folklore studies called ostension.
Ostension. That sounds like a vocab word for the SATs.
It's useful, I promise. Ostension is when people start acting out a legend, or more commonly, when they start interpreting real-world events through the lens of a legend.
So the story comes first.
The story comes first. Once the script of the black-eyed kids exists in the public consciousness, every time someone sees a weird kid in a hoodie at night, their brain doesn't just think weird kid, it jumps to monster. The story begins to shape how we perceive reality.
That is fascinating. We warp reality to fit the story we've already heard.
We do.
Speaking of warping reality for a good story, let's move from the digital world to a very physical one. A city that has basically monetized its ghost stories into a full-blown industry.
Let's go to New Orleans.
The Big Easy.
This is a great pivot because while The Black-Eyed Kids is a story created by the crowd, by the internet, the myths of New Orleans are stories that have been very carefully curated by what our source calls the tourism machine.
We're looking at a thesis here titled, Don't Be Myth-Taken. I love the academic pun.
It's good.
But the central argument is pretty serious. It claims that the city's tourism industry relies on, and I'm quoting here, romanticized racism. That is a heavy charge.
It is, but the historical data in the thesis really backs it up. The argument is that to sell tours, the city has created a version of its history that is sexy and tragic and, for the most part, largely fictional, especially when it comes to women of color.
Okay, so let's dig into an example. Myth number 1, the quadroon balls. If you go on a ghost tour in the French Quarter today, what are you going to be told about these?
You're going to be told this incredibly dramatic story. You'll hear that these were elegant, high society, but also tragic events. The story goes that free women of color, specifically mixed-race women, would attend these balls to be, well, inspected by wealthy white men.
Inspected? Wow.
Yeah, and if a man chose one of the women, her mother would negotiate a contract called plaquage, and this contract would set the girl up as his concubine. He'd provide a house for her, support her financially, but he could never legally marry her.
So it's framed as this glamorous, illicit, but almost formalized system of prostitution.
Exactly. It's the story of beautiful, tragic victims. But then historians like Kenneth Aslickson and Emily Clark went into the archives. They looked at the primary sources.
And what do they find?
When you look at newspaper advertisements from 1805, or you look at police records from that time, the whole narrative it collapses.
So what do the actual documents say?
They show that these were simply dances for free people of color. They were public events. They weren't some kind of secret, shady concubine market.
So the whole idea of the formal plaquage contract.
It's largely a fabrication. The thesis traces it back to white male travel writers from the mid-1800s.
So guys from the North, or maybe Europe, were coming down, seeing a mixed-race society they didn't understand, and just projecting their own fantasies onto it.
That's exactly it. They were writing what was essentially sensational fan fiction for audiences back home. They never actually attended these balls. They just assumed that independent, free women of color must be financially dependent on white men.
And the tragedy of that myth is that it strips these women of their agency.
Completely. In reality, the records show many of these women were incredibly successful property owners, businesswomen in their own right. They weren't passive victims waiting to be placed, but the tragic story sells more tours.
That theme of stripping agency for the sake of a story brings us to probably the most famous villain in New Orleans history.
Madame Delphine Laurie.
If you've seen American Horror Story, Coven, you know the image. Kathy Bates as this high society monster who severs heads and keeps her slaves in cages in the attic.
The legends are just stomach-turning. The human caterpillar, where she supposedly sewed people together. The story about her stirring someone's brains with a stick.
It's truly grotesque. But again, let's look at the source stack. Where do these specific stories come from?
Well, the primary source for the really lurid stuff, like the human caterpillar, is a book from 1946 by Jean Delavigne called Ghost Stories of Old New Orleans.
So it's explicitly a collection of folklore, not a history book.
Right. But something did happen at that house, at 1140 Royal Street. That part is true.
A fire.
Yes. On April 10th, 1834, a fire broke out in the kitchen. When the fire brigade arrived, they heard noises from the attic and they broke down the door.
And what did they find in there?
They found 7 enslaved people. And their condition was horrific, but it wasn't supernatural. They were chained to the walls. They were severely malnourished. They showed signs of old and new beatings. It was a scene of just extreme, brutal cruelty and neglect.
But no human caterpillars. No sex change experiments or brains being stirred.
No. The medical experiment angle is a more modern embellishment. The reality was just brutal, banal cruelty. And here's the nuance that the tours always, always miss. The husband. Dr. Louis LaLaurie.
He usually gets a pass in the stories, doesn't he?
He does. He's almost invisible. But if there was any kind of medical misconduct happening in that house, he was the doctor. He was the one with the surgical knowledge. Yet the folklore laser focuses on the mad madame.
Why?
Because a female villain is often sold as more sensational. The sources we looked at suggest that tours and guides are explicitly trained to focus on her because a female monster sells more tickets than a cruel, powerful husband.
One of the guys in the source material even admitted it. He said, "We find the most interesting story and go with that."
And that's the romanticized racism the thesis talks about in a nutshell. The real story. A wealthy white couple abusing their absolute power in a slave society. That's a history lesson about systemic evil.
The human caterpillar is a haunted house attraction.
Exactly. And the city chose the attraction over the history lesson.
It's easier to sell a monster than it is to hold up a mirror.
Beautifully put.
Speaking of monsters and mirrors, let's pivot now to a man who became the template for almost every cinematic slasher that followed. We're leaving the French Quarter and going to the desolate, isolated farmland of Plainfield, Wisconsin.
We're talking about Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield.
He's the inspiration for Norman Bates in Psycho, for Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and for Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs.
That is a heavy, heavy legacy for a man who, by all contemporary accounts, was quiet, shy, and mostly invisible to his neighbors.
Our source here is a transcript from Professor Graham Yorston, a forensic neuropsychiatrist, and he analyzes Gein not as a movie monster, but as a patient. And it starts, as it so often seems to, with the mother.
Augusta Gein. To understand Ed, you absolutely have to understand the theology of Augusta. She was a fanatical Lutheran who preached a fire and brimstone gospel day in and day out.
And she kept the boys completely isolated.
Completely. She moved the family to this remote farm to keep them away from the sin of the city. She read to Ed and his brother Henry from the Book of Revelation every single day. Her core teaching was that the world was fundamentally evil, and all women, with the sole exception of herself, were vessels of sin. Depraved, I think was her word.
She created this hermetically sealed world for these two boys. But there was the brother Henry. I feel like Henry is the forgotten character in this whole tragedy.
He really is. Henry was the older brother, and he was starting to break away. He had a job in town. He was starting to talk back to Augusta, planning to move in with a divorced woman. He was rejecting her worldview.
And then came the fire.
1944. There was a brush fire on the Gein property. Ed went to the police and reported his brother Henry missing. When the sheriff's deputies arrived, Ed led them directly to the body. Henry was dead, lying face down.
But the detail the report highlights is the cause of death.
Right. Exactly. Henry had bruises on his head, but his body hadn't been burned by the fire. The coroner listed the cause of death as asphyxiation, but the modern consensus among profilers is that Ed almost certainly killed him.
Why?
Henry was a threat. He was a threat to the sacred, isolated bond between Ed and Mother. With Henry gone, Ed had her all to himself.
Until she died a year later. From a stroke.
Yeah.
And that's when the psychosis really, really took the wheel.
That is the breaking point. After she dies, Ed boards up the upstairs rooms and the parlor. He keeps them pristine like a shrine. Statues, doilies, exactly as Augusta left them. But he lives in just the kitchen and a small bedroom, and those rooms fall into absolute squalor.
And he began his collection. We should probably warn the listener here. The details from the search warrant execution in 1957 are incredibly graphic.
They're the stuff of nightmares. The police were there looking for a missing hardware store owner, Bernice Warden. They found her body in Gaines' shed. She had been decapitated and field-dressed, hung upside down like a deer, but inside the house...
That's where they found the furniture.
The furniture, yes. He had lampshades made of human skin, a wastebasket made of skin, a belt made of human nipples, bowls made from the tops of skulls.
And the question everyone asks is, why? Where did he get all the bodies? Was he out hunting people every night?
Actually, no. And this is where the Texas Chainsaw myth really diverges from reality. Gein was not a prolific serial killer hunting down crowds of teenagers. Most of his collection came from grave robbing.
He was digging people up.
Yes. He confessed to about 40 visits to 3 local cemeteries. And he was very specific. He was only digging up recently buried middle-aged women.
Women who looked like his mother.
Exactly. He was trying to build a woman's suit. Police found a vest with breasts made of skin, leggings made of skin. He confessed that at night, he would put this suit on and walk around the farm.
The psychological term for this, I mean, it's not just serial killer, it's something far more specific and complex.
Well, the original diagnosis in 1957 was schizophrenia, but Professor Yorston, in our source, argues against that. He points out that in the mental hospital, Gein was calm. He was a model patient, he didn't hear voices, he wasn't disruptive.
So what's the alternative theory?
Yorston suggests schizotypal personality disorder. It's characterized by magical thinking, extreme social isolation, and very odd beliefs, but not the outright hallucinations of schizophrenia.
He believed he could literally become his mother by wearing her skin.
Or the skin of women who resembled her, yes. It was a desperate, deeply pathological attempt to reverse her death, to bring her back by embodying her. He wasn't killing for sexual gratification in the traditional sense. He was killing to restore his entire broken world.
It makes him seem less like a super predator like Hannibal Lecter and more like a pathetic, broken child in a man's body.
Which, in a way, is much, much scarier. It shows what happens when extreme isolation and psychological trauma are left to ferment for decades.
Let's contrast that with our next subject. Ed Gein was a confused, isolated loner. These next two were calculated, social predators. Let's talk about the Hillside Stranglers.
This is a huge shift. We're going from rural Gothic horror to pure urban noir. Los Angeles, late 1970s.
And this isn't one killer, it's a duo.
Cousins, Angelo Buono Jr. and Kenneth Bianchi.
The dynamic between them is fascinating. It's almost a master and apprentice situation, isn't it?
Very much so. Buono was the older cousin, the tough guy, the one with the criminal record. Bianchi was younger, more impressionable, desperate to impress him, they just fed off each other's sadism.
Their method of capture is what terrifies me the most. It just exploits our most basic social conditioning.
They played the role of authority. This was their key. They got their hands on fake police badges. They would drive around in an unmarked car, spot a woman alone, and pull her over, flash the badge.
And if you see a badge, you stop. You comply. You lower your guard.
That was the trap. By the time the victims realized these weren't real cops, they were already in the car and it was too late. They murdered 10 women and girls this way.
But there was one woman they let go. And it's a story that seems too Hollywood to be true, but it's right there in the police files.
Peter Lorre's daughter, Catherine Lore Baker.
Peter Lorre, the famous actor who, ironically, played a child killer in the classic movie M.
The irony is just palpable, isn't it? The Stranglers stopped her. They did their whole routine, flashed the badge, asked for her ID. She handed over her driver's license. And they saw the name Lore.
And they just panicked.
They did. They weren't afraid of the police. Not really. They were afraid of the publicity. They knew killing a celebrity's child would bring a level of media heat they just couldn't survive. So they made up an excuse and let her go.
Wow.
She didn't even realize she had been in danger until after they were caught and she saw their pictures on the news.
Let's talk about how they were caught, because this is where the true story gets into some really interesting legal and psychological weeds. Bianchi tried to pull a psycho defense.
He absolutely did. After he was arrested, he had moved to Washington and killed again, which is what got him caught. He claimed the murders were committed by an alter ego named Steve.
He was pleading insanity via dissociative identity disorder, multiple personalities.
Exactly, and he almost got away with it. He was convincing. Until they brought in an expert, Dr. Martin Orne.
And Orne saw right through him.
Dr. Orne was a psychiatrist who specialized in hypnosis and, more importantly, malingering faking illness. He suspected Bianchi was faking, so he set a brilliant trap. During one of their sessions, Orne casually mentioned to Bianchi, in genuine cases of multiple personality, there's usually a third personality involved as well.
He just made that up on the spot.
Completely fabricated it. But Bianchi, desperate to be convincing, took the bait. In the very next session, lo and behold, a third personality miraculously appeared.
He was basically improving his mental illness based on the doctor's notes.
Exactly. Orne also told him that real alters would sometimes hallucinate people in the room. Suddenly, Bianchi starts seeing his lawyer in the corner of the room, a lawyer who isn't there. Orne proved conclusively that Bianchi was simply a psychopath trying to game the system.
It's just such a stark contrast to someone like Ed Gein, who was genuinely detached from reality. Bianchi knew exactly what he was doing.
He knew, he just didn't want to pay the price for it.
Let's stay in that legal world for a moment, but move the venue across the country to Long Island.
Yeah.
112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville.
Yes. The most famous haunted house in America.
We all know the story of the Lutz family, right?
Yeah.
The flies, the green slime coming out of the walls, the disembodied voice yelling, "Get out."
The whole 9 yards.
But the real horror, the foundational horror, happened before they ever moved in. The DeFeo murders.
Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. This is the bedrock of the entire legend. On November 13th, 1974, he took a .35 Marlin lever-action rifle and in the middle of the night shot his father, his mother, his 2 brothers, and his 2 sisters.
The detail that has always fueled the conspiracy theories and the ghost stories is the lack of noise.
It is genuinely baffling. A .35 Marlin is a loud weapon. It's a deer rifle. Firing it indoors would be deafening. He fired it 8 times inside a suburban house at around 3 in the morning.
And yet, none of the neighbors heard anything. And more bizarrely, none of the family members seemed to have woken up.
That's the core mystery. All 6 victims were found face down in their beds. There were no signs of a struggle.
DeFeo claimed he drugged them, didn't he?
He did. That was one of his many stories. But the toxicology reports came back clean. No sedatives. So the big question remains, how did 6 people sleep through what was essentially a gun battle happening in their own hallway?
That's where the demonic influence theory comes in. The idea that some paranormal force held them down or silenced the gunshots.
That's the movie version, for sure. But the source stack points to a much grimier, more human reality. DeFeo changed his story constantly. First, it was a mob hit. Then he claimed his sister Dawn did it and he killed her in self-defense. Then he just claimed desperation.
So what's the most likely explanation?
The most likely reality is that the first shots probably did wake the others, but they were frozen in fear. It's a legitimate trauma response. Or that he simply moved incredibly fast from room to room before they could react.
And what about the whole ancient Native American burial ground theory?
Total fiction. It's been repeatedly and publicly rejected by local historical societies and Shinnecock Nation leaders. The Amityville Horror, as we know it from the book and movies, was largely a hoax cooked up by the Lutz family and their lawyer to capitalize on the very real tragedy of the DeFeo murders.
So Amityville is a hoax built on top of a horrific crime. But that brings us to the final item in our supernatural stack, the one that the experts to this day can't easily explain away.
Let's talk about The Exorcist.
This is the one.
This is the one that keeps me up at night. Because we aren't dealing with a family looking for a book deal. We are looking at the 1949 case of a boy anonymously called Roland Doe, and our primary source is the actual diary kept by Father Raymond Bishop, one of the attending priests.
The tone of this diary is what strikes me. It's not written like a horror novel.
Not at all. It's clinical. It's a logbook. It reads like a nurse's chart. March 11th, 12 a.m., pulse 120. Boy is calm. And that mundane, matter-of-fact tone makes the content so much more terrifying.
Okay, let's contrast the movie with the diary. In the movie, we get spinning heads and projectile pea soup. What does the diary actually describe?
It describes physics breaking down in small ways. It starts with scratching sounds in the walls that would follow the boy from room to room, even when they moved houses. Then, a picture of Christ on the wall started shaking violently, bumping against the plaster on its own.
And the marching feet sound.
Yes. The boy's mother and grandmother both reported hearing the distinct rhythmic sound of marching feet beating on the boy's mattress when no one was near it. But the physical evidence that appeared on the boy's body is the hardest to dismiss.
The writing on the skin.
Yes. Red welts, like scratches, would just appear instantly on his chest and legs, and they would form words. The first word was Louis, then Saturday, then 3-12 weeks.
And Louis was interpreted to mean they needed to go to St. Louis for help, right?
That was the interpretation, yes. And when they got to the Alexian Brothers Hospital in St. Louis, things escalated dramatically. The diary describes the boy spitting with supernatural accuracy, hitting the priests directly in the eye from across the room, even when his own eyes were squeezed shut.
And the singing, that detail felt so specific and weird.
It's utterly bizarre. In the middle of a violent thrashing fit, the boy would suddenly go still and begin singing Old Man River in a piercingly high falsetto, using full dramatic arm gestures like a vaudeville performer. Then he'd just snap right back into the deep demonic voice.
A skeptic would say. It's self-harm, it's hysteria, it's psychosomatic symptoms.
And they might be right. But the diary is meticulous. It notes that these scratches appeared on his skin while 3 grown men were physically holding his hands and feet. The brand-like marks that spelled the word Hey L appeared on his chest in front of multiple doctors and nurses who were there as witnesses.
The ending of the case is interesting, too. It wasn't some dramatic climax with the priest jumping out a window.
No, it was sudden and quiet. During the final rite, the boy's voice changed. He said he saw a beautiful figure in white, who he identified as St. Michael, holding a flaming sword. The figure said the word Dominus, and then the boy calmly said, "He's gone."
And that was it.
That was it. He grew up, had a career, had children, and according to the priests, never had another paranormal experience again. He and his family never spoke of it publicly.
Which is so different from Amityville, where the victims went on every talk show they could find. The Roland Doe family just went dark. They wanted nothing to do with the fame.
Which, if nothing else, lends a lot of credibility to the trauma they experienced.
We've covered demons, we've covered serial killers, we've covered hoaxes. Let's end our deep dive in the dream world.
Let's talk about A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Freddy Krueger, the burned man with the bladed glove.
An icon of horror.
Most people think Wes Craven just invented a cool, scary monster. But the origin story is rooted in a very specific and truly heartbreaking historical event.
It is. In the early 80s, Craven was in a bit of a creative slump, and he was reading the LA Times every day, and he started following this series of articles about Shamam refugees.
Okay, give us the context here. Who were these refugees? Where were they coming from?
They were fleeing Cambodia and Laos during the reign of Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. I mean, we were talking about genocide, the killing fields. These were people who had witnessed their families being tortured and executed. They arrived in America carrying a massive, unbelievable load of trauma.
And then the young men started dying. In their sleep.
It was a complete medical mystery. It was so prevalent they gave it a name. SUNDS. Sudden Unexplained Nocturnal Death Syndrome. You had young, otherwise healthy men, average age 33, no known heart conditions. They would go to sleep and simply never wake up.
Their hearts just stopped.
Their hearts just stopped. But the Hmong community had a very different explanation. In their animist beliefs, they have spirits called the Dabsog. It's a kind of malevolent spirit or a nightmare hag.
Okay.
They believed that because they had fled their homeland and weren't able to perform the proper ancestral rituals, these nightmare spirits were coming across the ocean to attack them in their dreams and drag their souls away.
So you have a very real physiological condition.
Yeah.
We now think it's a genetic heart arrhythmia called Brugada syndrome, colliding with extreme psychological stress and a powerful cultural belief.
Exactly. And Wes Craven read one specific account that became the seed for Freddy Krueger. It was about a young boy. He told his parents he was terrified to sleep because the thing was chasing him in his dreams, and he knew it would get him if he slept.
So he just tried to stay awake.
For days, his parents found a coffee pot he had hidden under his bed so he could secretly drink caffeine all night to stay awake.
That's just a desperate, tragic image. A little kid with a coffee pot fighting for his life against a dream.
Finally, after days of this, exhaustion just took him. He fell asleep. About an hour later, his parents heard these terrible screams coming from his room. By the time they got to him, he was dead.
He died in the middle of the nightmare.
He died in the nightmare. That is the core of Freddy Krueger. It's not really about a child killer from the neighborhood. It's about trauma. It's about the idea that your past, your guilt, or your deepest fears can manifest physically and literally kill you. Craven took the very real tragedy of the Hmong refugees and gave it a face and a glove.
It really circles back to what we said at the very beginning. The true story is so often sadder than the film. Freddy Krueger is scary. But the idea of a young man surviving a genocide, only to die of fear in a safe suburban bed, is profoundly tragic.
It forces you to ask, what are we actually scared of? Are we scared of the monster with the knives on his fingers? Or are we scared of the reality that the monster represents?
So we've gone through the whole stack. We've seen how Ed Gein's Private Madness was birthed in a lonely, isolated farmhouse. We've seen how the Hillside Stranglers exploited our trust in authority to become predators.
We've seen New Orleans turning real historical pain into a profitable ghost tour, and we've seen a group of priests facing something utterly unexplainable in a hospital room in 1949.
If there's a synthesis here, a single takeaway, what is it?
I think it's that horror fiction is a processing mechanism. It's a tool we use. We invent vampires because the reality of a Kenneth Bianchi is too grim and banal.
Yeah.
We invent ghosts because the reality of sudden, random death is too chaotic to accept.
We wrap the sharp edges of reality in the velvet of folklore so that we can handle them without cutting ourselves.
That's it exactly. Perfectly said.
Before we sign off, I just want to leave our listener with one final thought to mull over. We can pretty confidently debunk the Black-Eyed Kids as a 90s viral post. We can debunk Amityville as a cynical hoax. But that priest's diary from 1949...
It just sits there on the shelf, doesn't it? It's a document written by skeptical men, corroborated by doctors and nurses, and it describes things that, according to our understanding of the world, simply shouldn't happen.
Sometimes the deep dive hits a bottom that we just can't explain.
And maybe that is the true horror.